Nurse Rankin was going to give you an update concerning our numbers of folks impacted here with COVID.
So currently, across the district, since the first day of school, we've had 5 employees test positive for COVID. 10 of them have been exposed and needing quarantine. We've had 20 that have needed, or that were showing symptoms and decided to not come to work because they were symptomatic. And of those 20, 14 that we know of have tested negative, so they're back to work. On the student side, we've had 13 students since the first day of school that have tested positive, 120 that have needed to be quarantined or they were exposed and had to stay home. And we've had 26 that were showing symptoms that were sent home, and we've had 20 of those that have since tested negative. So today it's been a rough day, COVID day, and I don't have all the data collected from today, but I can just give you a little piece of what I have seen today. We have had, I think, 3 positive COVID people in the district. I think 2 employees and 1, or actually 2 students, now that I think about it. We've since had to quarantine 38 students today in 1 building and, over 2 buildings. And we've had to quarantine 15 employees. And 14 employees have requested COVID leave since Friday. So we've seen, since Friday, a pretty big uptick in our COVID numbers. Some of that I feel like might be leftover or aftermath from the holiday weekend. I'm not sure, but it's a little bit concerning as we are only on Monday this week to see how this week's going to unfold. So those are the numbers. Do you guys have any questions for me?
I do have a question. What is the procedure for quarantine? I mean, how are we, is there like a quarantine tree that we are following?
We do. 14 that we know of have tested negative, so they're back to work. On the student side, we've had 13 students since the first day of school that have tested positive, 120 that have needed to be quarantined or they were exposed and had to stay home. And we've had 26 that were showing symptoms that were sent home, and we've had 20 of those that have since tested negative. So today it's been a rough day, COVID day, and I don't have all the data collected from today, but I can just give you a little piece of what I have seen today. We have had, I think, 3 positive COVID people in the district. I think 2 employees and 1, or actually 2 students, now that I think about it. We've since had to quarantine 38 students today in 1 building and, over 2 buildings. And we've had to quarantine 15 employees. And 14 employees have requested COVID leave since Friday. So we've seen, since Friday, a pretty big uptick in our COVID numbers. Some of that I feel like might be leftover or aftermath from the holiday weekend. I'm not sure, but it's a little bit concerning as we are only on Monday this week to see how this week's going to unfold. So those are the numbers. Do you guys have any questions for me?
I do have a question. What is the procedure for quarantine? I mean, how are we, is there like a quarantine tree that we are following?
We
or
do.
making those determinations?
So we follow CDC protocol as far as who needs to quarantine. So if we have a positive case, so we get notified that we have a positive employee or student, doesn't matter, we treat that the same. We start by contact tracing. And how do you contact trace? Well, we talk to the person that's positive and find out who they've been in close contact with. So close contact is defined as anyone that has been within 6 foot of the positive person for more than 15 minutes cumulatively throughout the day, so not 15 minutes at one time. So we start there, and we look at seating charts in classrooms. We look at who they sit with at lunch. We look at what bus they ride on, all those things, and we try to determine who their close contacts are. So anyone that has had close contact with a positive person has to quarantine for 14 days from their last exposure to that person. So, you know, sometimes, like for instance, one of the cases today, they were tested last Thursday, and we found out today that they were positive. So we have to go back to last Thursday, and then 2 days prior to that, when they started having their symptoms, and see who they were around. It's a grueling process.
So are you doing that all by yourself?
No.
Okay.
Between myself, my school nurses, I have a nurse. I try to get my sub nurses to kind of be on call for us, so that if I need assistance with that, because it is a very lengthy process, then I can call an extra nurse in. We also have a float nurse in the district this year, and so she's been very instrumental in assisting with that as well.
So then when we do quarantine, who follows up with them? Because I know there's been some concern where parents have been told that the health department would follow up, and then they never heard from the health department. And it seems like there's a little bit of miscommunication.
Well,
So, which is understandable, but I mean, I feel like we need to make sure that, you know, there aren't students being lost, or I know that I had heard that someone had been told that their student was exposed, but their distance learns. So, I mean, that's why I'm curious what the protocol is and where.
well, in week one, it was a little bit crazy because we hadn't gone down this path before, and it was all new to all of us. And ultimately, it's the health department's job to quarantine people that are positive. But I, in the position that I am, cannot wait 3 or 4 days when we have a positive student or teacher or staff member to make those calls and send people home. So I have seek the guidance from our health department as far as what can we do. If we know a kid is positive, what can we do? And they asked us to start the contact tracing process. So the follow-up is hard, and that's where they're having issues too at the health department. You know, there's just so many phone calls that you can make in a day. And so they have given a form, an instruction form, that when we quarantine a student, it it has the name of the student on it. We send it home with the student. It has the date that they were last exposed, and that is the 14. We go from that date 14 days forward to inform the parent or guardian as far as how long their quarantine will last. And I've been writing in there the day that they could come back to school as well, because we have had some confusion where they saw that my quarantine's up on the 8th. Well, they came back on the 8th. They should have waited till the 9th.
I understand.
So, as far as where students are seated in the grade schools especially, they're seated consistently in the same spots, are they not? And to kind of minimize their exposure. And then what about at lunch? Do they sit in those same seats?
Are we talking about elementary or high school?
Elementary.
I'm not really certain. I would have to find out from the specific building on how they're handling that. I do know, because I'm in the high school every day, that the kids are sitting at the same tables for lunch. They're assigned seating. I believe they're assigned seating in the elementaries as well. So,
But in the elementary, do they stay in their classrooms to eat? Or do they go out to the cafeteria?
They're going to the cafeteria.
Okay. And is there a way to try to make sure they're sitting next to their same table mates?
Yeah, we have additional staff in the lunchrooms, kind of coordinating seating, ensure by seating as well.
So they're hopefully not exposed to too many more people in the cafeteria even. Okay.
Yeah, and they've spread them out, and they have some space.
Great.
And I understand, it has to be a total nightmare to try to keep all of this straight, but it is really important that I know there was one particular high school student who had to drop the college class because of it, and I hate to see students miss out on those opportunities, and that was one that was really confused. Can I go back? I'm not really sure why I'm quarantined. And so I really think that we do, we need
and I've gone to the extent of, is I do not want to quarantine anyone that isn't, I mean, today, for instance, I went to the classrooms at the high school, sat down in the seat, stretched my arms out to see if we were 6 foot apart on who we need to quarantine, because that 6 foot rule. But all I can say is we really are trying to do the best we can, and it's hard making those phone calls. We have parents of seniors that are upset because their daughter's missing their senior year softball, you know, and things like that. So, and it's just really hard. It is hard when you have guidelines set down from other places, and people may or may not agree with them completely. But we have to follow the policy and procedures that have been sent down to us. And
So
what are
can we get copies of those? Because are those coming from the health department?
It's on the CDC website. You can look at under the and actually there's a link to it on the decision trees that I sent out as far as how we make these decisions to have when to quarantine and isolate. So it's those guidelines.
And is that a DESI requirement that we follow that?
Well, DESI, they follow the same guidelines. It's all the same CDC guidelines as far as.
Correct.
But there's no one that's telling us that we have to follow that.
You know, there's so much confusion because it's coming down from the top. It's follow what your local public health officials tell you to do. And so that's what we get from the health department is we follow CDC guidelines. And that's how they follow the same guidelines when they're contact tracing at the health department as well. So we're not following separate guidelines that the health department's following for the community. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and DESI's guidance has been to follow the CDC.
Right.
So I believe DESI has said that's what we're supposed to follow.
That and, you know, there's been some confusion because we do have a lot of hospital employee parents because the hospital, and you guys can probably attest to this that are hospital employees, they have different guidelines because they're considered essential workers. So that was one of the confusions today was, well, if my child tests negative after they've been exposed, can they come to school? And the answer is no. And so that came directly from our health department as well. So that was, a lot of parents called me back and said, can my kid come to school if I go get them tested and they come back negative? And the answer is no, because there's a 14-day incubation period with this virus. So even if they're negative today and their quarantine isn't up for another 5 or 6 days, they could still be contagious and carrying that virus for another 5 or 6 days. It's very
Do they
common.
need a doctor's note to come back to school?
Initially, we were requiring all students to have a doctor's note or at least a note from the health
Even
department.
the ones that were just quarantined and weren't ill?
But the health department requested that we not do that because they were just inundated with trying to get us letters. So they gave me the letter that we're sending home. It's directly from the health department that says what their quarantine is and when they can return. So that's their release to come back.
Can you give us a copy of that?
I sure can, absolutely.
It's specified in the guidelines, say if you're quarantined for 14 days and your 14 days is up on Friday, is it specified exactly what can they participate in football or in cheer, band on Friday night? Or does it count the following day?
Well, and that was another thing that came up. I'm glad you said that because it was, okay, I was exposed at 10 in the morning. So can I go back at 10 in the morning? And I brought that up to the health department because once again, this is their authority to advise us on what to do. And they said trying to keep track of what we're keeping track of already is enough. To try and keep a track of what hour a student is exposed, there's just, it would end up making people upset. And they said, no, we're going to follow the full 24 hours of any given day.
Okay, so say that if it ends on, quarantine ends on Friday, then Saturday, then it'll be clear. But Friday
Right, correct.
is too close. I got you. That makes sense.
I mean, that does make sense, but at the same time, it's our students' mental health too. I mean, if there's a situation like that, I feel like we really should, I mean, I know that's a lot more to keep track of, but we've got seniors missing
Rhode Island has shown that, there's evidence of that, so we can talk all day about keeping kids in school, and we have the power to do it, but we're not, so that's fine.
We are wearing masks in the classrooms.
But we could do it in the community, we could do a better job, we're a hot zone, and there's a reason for it, so we could do better, we could do a lot better.
Well, and I just want to say one last thing, unless you have more questions for me, is that with what I've seen today, I am very, very concerned that we're just going to skyrocket, because the numbers in one day are almost more than all the numbers from last week.
What were
So we're
numbers
seeing
today?
the today numbers, and I haven't even gone through each individual buildings, but the ones that I personally worked on were 38 students
What were positives for today?
that were quarantined. How many positive?
Yes.
Four
Four
positive.
positives today.
And 15 employees that had to quarantine.
Emerald Springs,
So for 4 positive cases, we're quarantining all, I mean,
They're all their close contacts.
And our whole community.
the whole community. right?
Emerald Springs,
The entire hallway, whole group.
Kindergartners, first graders.
chalk it up.
The buses, Young Elementary. We're more positive cases.
We had,
Disrupting their normalcy.
Let's have order, please, not, thank
Got
you.
clarification.
Let's have order, thank you.
I mean,
So-
are you concerned about the quarantines at Dogwood, if there was just one particular case in that building? I mean, that's a lot to quarantine for one case. Is that, was it one case in Dogwood?
yes, and we had several employees out at Dogwood already that have requested off because of COVID concerns. So, and I can't go into
Right.
intricate details because of
Right.
privacy, but I just have concerns that we're seeing this trend of not social distancing,
yeah,
not
I-
wearing masks,